Hey, what's up everyone? My name's Josh Winiarski, and I'm a photographer, filmmaker, and I need to get back to vlogging here on YouTube as well as Instagram, and today we are talking about a legendary lens. If you've never heard of it, you're in for a treat because you'll never stop hearing about this lens for the rest of time. The one, the only, the Nifty 50. Now, this is an extremely popular lens, there's a lot going on with it, but today I'm just going to be talking about 5 reasons why you might want to consider this lens for yourself, so let's get into it. The first reason you might want to consider this lens is price. This lens comes in at $125 new, which is super cheap for a lens. And I'm going to say this with a little bit of caution because yes, I know $125 is not cheap for everyone, but relatively speaking, objectively speaking, this is a cheap lens. Other EFS lenses are $200, $300, sometimes even a little more new, so objectively speaking, this lens is dirt cheap. If you've recently gotten a camera and you're looking for a second lens, something aside from the kit lens or whatever you're starting out with, this is a good option because it's not going to break the bank, but it's going to expand what you can do with your camera. Now, you might be sitting there like, Josh, I don't have $125 to spend on a lens. And guess what? That's okay because that's only for the newest, top of the line version of the 50mm 1.8. I think there were around 2 models before this, and if you go with an older model, you might be able to find it for $100 or $80. New or open box, I don't know if they really manufacture them anymore. And if that's still too expensive, companies like Yongnuo make a 50mm, it's very cheap feeling, but it gets the job done, a 50mm f1.8 for $50. A nifty 50 for $50. And if that's still too expensive, you can always look at used lenses, which is what I personally recommend most of the time. So if you've got a camera and you're looking for a new lens, it's tough to beat the 50mm f1.8's price. I mean, there's only a handful of lenses. Actually, there's not even a handful. There's like half a hand of, what am I saying? There are literally only a couple of lenses made in the past 10 years that are gonna come in cheaper than this one. Alright, point number 2, form factor. When you look at this lens, the form factor is awesome. Hold up. Okay, so here's the 50mm. It's like less than half the size of a 75-300. It's like half the size of a Rokinon 14mm. Heck, it's even significantly smaller than a kit lens. My point being, the only thing really smaller than the 50mm is gonna be something like a pancake lens, but even then, I mean, come on, you can't complain about a lens this size. On top of that, it's made out of plastic, so it's super lightweight. You can toss it in the air. I mean, never do that with lenses, but you could. I have the newest model, which is made out of a relatively strong feeling plastic. I think the older ones are a little bit cheaper. You still get a metal mount on it, so it's lightweight, but durable. But thanks to this form factor, you can toss it in a bag, stuff it in your pocket, wherever. It's really easy to carry on you. It's not like other lenses where you might be like, ooh, I don't know if I want to take that. No, the 50mm, it can come with you anytime, anywhere. And I guess this is only sort of form factor, but it is an EF mount lens, meaning it's going to work on crop sensor cameras like Rebels, 70Ds, 80Ds, 90Ds, but it's also going to work on full frame cameras like your 5D Mark IVs, your 1DXs, all that good stuff. If size, weight, compatibility, if any of that sometimes gets in your way, this is a good lens because it's super easy to just take anywhere. Alright, point number 3, this is a fast lens. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean this lens is going to beat you in a 100-meter sprint, or you can roll it and it'll go really fast? No, not at all. What that means is it has a really low aperture number. This is a 50mm f1.8, the aperture goes down to 1.8. What that means is it's going to let a ton of light in, and it's going to be great for low light shooting. It's called a fast lens because when you're shooting in low light, you can still have a fast shutter speed. So if there's movement and it's a little bit dark, you can still get crisp action shots. It's a fast lens, you can use a fast shutter speed, you can capture fast movements. But how good is this lens for low light? Well, let's compare it to something like the kit lens. The kit lens at 55mm goes to f5.6. This sits at 50mm. It's not exactly the same amount, but it's close enough. And it goes down to f1.8. Now, those numbers might not sound super far off. but 1.8 is actually going to let in a little over 8 times as much light as that 5.6. And that's no exaggeration. In fact, I think it's closer to 10 times as much light if I did my math correctly. So let's put that in perspective. So let's say you're shooting with a kit lens and you need ISO 5000 at f5.6 to get a properly exposed image. But if you're using this lens, the 50mm, you can go down to ISO 500, 640, around there, and you can get the exact same exposure. That is a humongous difference. So to show you what I mean, here's a picture of a plant I took with the kit lens, and here's the same shot with the 50mm. One thing you might have picked up on is these images don't look exactly the same. When shot with the 50mm f1.8, you actually get a shallower depth of field, which means less things are in focus, which gives you that blurry background. This is going to be awesome if you're into portrait photography, product photography, anything like that. It's going to give you that professional look that isolates the subject that a lot of photographers really like. Now, typically lenses this fast with this low of an aperture are really expensive. A lot of pro lenses, L lenses if you shoot on Canon, can be over $1,000 and only go to f2.8. This is pretty much $100 and it goes to 1.8, which is gonna let in twice as much light. Back when I was shooting on my Rebel T6, this was a game changer for low light shooting. On that camera, I really like to keep my ISO at 1600 or lower, 3200 tops. This guy was so helpful for sticking to that goal and not getting really noisy, grainy images. Alright, and for point number 4, this is a prime lens. Now you might be wondering, what's a prime lens? Well, a prime lens has a fixed focal length. It can't zoom. In this case, we have 50mm. Now, why might this be a pro? Well, it turns out prime lenses are actually sharper, generally speaking, than zoom lenses. And even if you don't know a lot about how lenses are made, it makes a lot of sense. This is a solid piece. There really aren't any moving parts aside from the autofocus system. It's just a brick. They manufacture it. It doesn't have to be sharp at multiple focal lengths. It just sits there, it's precise, it gets the job done. Especially if you're willing to stop down to like f4, I've used this to take group photos and they are tack sharp. And again, because it's a prime lens, it's built like a brick, like it just feels like one solid piece. And what I like about that is with something like a zoom lens, especially the inexpensive ones, when you zoom in and out, it actually exposes this inner tube, which allows things like dirt, dust, moisture to kind of sneak into your lens if you're not careful. With this lens, there's none of that. It's just one piece. Again, the autofocus goes in and out, but it's one less point of entry for the elements. And one more thing that's kind of cool with a prime lens is the fact that it forces you to get creative sometimes. Remember, you can't zoom in and out with this lens. That means you have to move around. You have to get closer to your subject, you have to get farther away, you have to move to the left, to the right. A lot of the time, putting restriction on yourself forces you to shoot something a little bit different than the obvious approach, which can get you some really creative shots. And the last reason to consider this lens, and this pertains particularly to the new model, is it has an STM motor. Now, these aren't the fastest focusing motors on the market, but they're pretty dang good, just under the USM, but the big advantage is they're silent. This means that if you're shooting somewhere and it's supposed to be quiet, or you're just recording video and you don't want to catch the autofocus noise from this lens, you don't have to worry about it. They are the most quiet focusing lenses you can get, which is more professional, right? You don't want to be shooting, I don't know, at a church and have your lens all of a sudden making these annoying sounds and people are kind of looking up. It's not a huge deal for photography, but it is a big deal for video, so it's great that they included that. And this lens, for this price, it's tough to beat. But if you've watched any of my videos before, you know I try not to be one-sided. This lens isn't perfect. First off, it's not a great walk-around lens, and that's because it's a prime lens. You can't zoom in, you can't zoom out. What this means is there are some shots you can't get with this lens. Like let's say you're shooting in a building or you're shooting in a tight space, you're trying to get a body shot of someone, you're way up against the wall, you've got the camera back here. If you can't fit them in, you can't fit them in. Now, sometimes this leads to creative shots, but sometimes it leads to just frustration because you can't get the shot. And on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes you're gonna need to get closer to your subject, but you can't because this lens can't zoom. Maybe you're shooting an event, weddings, wildlife, doesn't matter. Sometimes you can't get closer to your subject, and in that case you're SOL. Same thing if you're trying to shoot landscapes, architecture, this lens often isn't going to fit everything in, or you just want to crop in a little, crop out. And when I say a little, more of a decent amount that you couldn't do in post. I guess you can't crop out in post regardless, but sometimes having a prime lens is just going to lead to frustration, so you often need to have another lens on you if you're using this. A few other small things: it is plastic, it's not the most durable, gets the job done for me. Just don't, slam it on concrete or something, which you wouldn't want to do with any lens. Plus, it has some weird thread sizes. These are like 49mm. None of your other lenses are going to have this, which means you're going to need to use multiple step-up rings if you want to use any kind of filters with this lens. And one last thing to keep in mind: if you throw it on a crop sensor camera, it's going to be 80mm. That's pretty zoomed in. Now, it's going to be awesome for headshots, portrait photography, but that makes it even harder to use as a general purpose lens. Whew, all that being said, I think this is the best lens to learn on. It's that first lens most people get that can go down to f1.8, which is pretty crazy. I mean, it's that lens where you really start to understand aperture. With the kit lens, going from 3.5 to 9, you'll see the difference, but when you go down to 1.8, oh, that's when you start to realize you can make the background too blurry, or you can let in way too much light. So this is where you really start to understand how your camera works. It's the best way to visually see that. On top of that, it's going to get you a more professional look, and for me, this is the get out of jail free card of lenses. Whenever I'm shooting, if I don't know what the situation is going to be like, I always want to have this lens on me. It doesn't matter what I'm normally shooting on, I want to keep this on me, because if it gets too dark, for whatever reason, it gets overcast, they turn the lights off, I'm shooting a dance party. You've heard me talk about it before on this channel. This lens has saved me in low light conditions. And for whatever it's worth, there are more expensive versions, kind of increasing exponentially. The 1.4 I believe is a little over $300, and there's a 1.2 version which is over $1,000. But whichever one you decide to go with, the 50mm is just a beast. It is such a great piece of kit to have. Highly recommend it. If you're looking for a second lens, a third lens, or maybe you have more and you don't have this yet, everyone talks about it, it's always praised, but that's for good reason. As always, if you like the video, be sure to like it. If you have any questions, have any comments, hit up that comment section down below. And if you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks again for watching. My name's Josh Winiarski. Check me out on Instagram. And are you using the 50mm? Do you want to get a 50mm? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you all in the next one. Was I talking fast in this video? I feel like I was talking kind of fast. I had 2 cups of coffee before this, so I don't know.